Welcome back. We're Rope and Ladder. Today we're going to be talking about the fifth song on our record, The Conspiracy.
I'm the fatigue, I'm the weakness in their knees, I'm the inner begging, plead a buckle underneath the weight.
So there are a lot of songs on this record that I slaved over every lyric and detail of, and The Conspiracy is not one of those songs. I think it was one of the fastest creative processes from start to finish. I remember a fall day in college walking to, I think, an acoustics class, and the concept and the lyrics of The Conspiracy just kind of like flooding into my head during that walk. So I just sort of rushed to class and got in my seat and opened my notebook and kind of just spilled the lyrics out. And I think it encapsulated the entirety of the first couple verses and the chorus.
Yeah, I think musically too, I definitely remember jamming on this with you back in college when we were both home on break. And, you know, we had little bits and pieces of like Invasion and Rope written that we'd play through, but I think Conspiracy was definitely the most that we had musically kind of written together. Like, I don't think this song ever went in a different direction than what it ended up in. I think like we didn't hem and haw over like different versions or different attempts. I think it just kind of, we just went from start to finish and just built the song that way.
Yeah, I think The Conspiracy and Rope and Ladder were the first two songs that were done, and I put done in quotes because we didn't finish the guitar solo for The Conspiracy until, I don't know, a couple of months before the record was made. But compositionally, it was kind of open and shut. In contrast to songs like The Invasion, like you talked about, which were started way back in the late 2007, 2008 range. I don't think we wrote the chorus for that song until 5 or 6 years later. So The Conspiracy plays like a pretty obvious conceptual piece in the record, which is it's from the perspective of the antagonist. And through this kind of open prayer, we get to learn a little bit about his character and learn about what his plan is. And the crux of his plan kind of comes into focus at the apex of the song, where he says, "You won't know where to run if you don't know who you're running from." So the basic gist of the plan is to kind of infiltrate everybody close to the protagonist and turn them against him and play around with like his mental security. And it's also pretty apparent that, I don't know, is it explicit that he's gonna like use the wife as a vector after the fact? We have some hints of that. We have the conspiracy smothered in passion. And then we kind of have the like way too obvious biblical reference at the end of the serpent and the fruit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the gist of his plan, is to work with his wife. He references a tragic flaw of the protagonist, and that tragic flaw is how trusting he is of his wife. And the basic plan is to identify that flaw and expose it. Work with her to turn people close to him against him and come to power.
You're obviously the voice of the protagonist and the antagonist. How early on in the song do you think the listener is supposed to figure out that it's the antagonist?
Yeah, I guess that's not really a question for me. You'd have to ask a listener. But I think we do a good job of bottling up some sort of like antagonisty, spooky, dark church swagger, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Dark church swagger.
Anyway, we wrote this song in college, and it's during that part of your life where you're set free from the nest and you start having to think and reconcile the world for yourself. So I think I was trying to figure out how I felt about organized religion in general, and it was really easy for me to explore that idea by creating this character who has a very decisive viewpoint on it, on one end of that spectrum, and kind of just exploring what the blown out version of that frustration looks like. Also, from like a storytelling perspective, it's just a super easy way for it to make sense to have somebody talking out loud to themselves. have them be praying. I think one of the big unanswered questions of the record is kind of like, who is this guy? What happens to him after the invasion? I think we created a pretty compelling, like, calculated evil genius kind of character, and it'd be interesting to explore him a little more in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure he has some sort of backstory.
Unless he's the protagonist time traveling.
Time traveling, yeah. A favorite fan theory.
I still don't hate that idea. There would definitely be some kinks to work out to figure out if, the protagonist gets so disillusioned by this experience that he somehow in a parallel universe becomes the antagonist for this exact same storyline. Compositionally, I think The Conspiracy is kind of closest to an honest, modern pop song structure, I guess. It's a couple verses, it's a couple chorus. How many songs on the record do we repeat a chorus even once?
Yeah, that's a good point. Not many. One thing, I guess, so it definitely has the structure of a pop song, but it's also like pushing 6 minutes long, if not a little over.
Right. Yeah, we sing the chorus 3 times, which is definitely a record. So in that sense, I just mean that it's the most traditional in that it has 2 parallel verses, 3 choruses, a bridge.
A bridge, yeah.
And then I guess the outro is kind of the what word am I thinking of? Outlier. There it is. It's always funny when like I cut these together and like if one of us takes a while to get to an idea and we're just totally in a different posture by the time we get there. So it's like
I know. I've noticed that during a few videos. I try to be conscious of it and just like sit in one place, but it's hard. Same thing with like taking a sip of beer. Like,
yeah,
one of us could be like mid sip.
It's all right. The people will forgive us. We start with this sort of honky-tonk piano part, swung beat, jovial little bass line here. This is actually one of my favorite bass lines on the record, so I want to highlight it real quick. Favorite meaning, I think it's just the most fun to play.
Cool.
This is probably the most popular sentence that we say on our podcast, but it does a good job of pushing momentum forward.
Yeah. A lot of the feeling you were just describing about the intro, I think, stems from this bass part too.
We have the piano super tinny, and we have you up on the rims of the snare, so all that super high frequency space. So it gives the bass guitar the opportunity to explore both the entire bottom half of the frequency space and the little nooks and crannies of the time space.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned in the most elegant fashion.
So we bring in the lead vocal. We want it to be a little spooky.
I've never really noticed this before, but it's kind of interesting how much of a contrast there is between the vocals and like the music part. The instrumentation straight out of like a Western saloon or something like that. And the vocals are much more, they could fit in with a much more like somber background, like the intro to Betrayed or something like that.
Totally. And I think that's what makes it spooky. When you have things kind of completely plucked out of context. Like, have you ever seen I think it's The Conjuring is a horror movie, and they play this record whenever something scary is about to happen, which is this falsetto singer named Tiny Tim. He sings a song. It's like, oh, tiptoe through the window. And it's just this very jovial classical song on a record player, which isn't scary by itself, but like do that in a dark room in the middle of the night, and that's super, super creepy. I think we're kind of doing something similar with the piano's kind of intentionally detuned, and the contrast between how jovial that stuff is and the vocal kind of make it sound like they're, I don't know, like the instrumentation is from a different time. Or
Yeah. And then you're abruptly ripped out of that when the verse starts.
A conspiracy smothered in passion, a flaw so tragic it's as if he were asking for it to be exposed. Forgive me, Father, but with all due respect.
right here we snap out of kind of the honky-tonk swung part and hop back into, probably for the first time on the record, just our firm post-hardcore home bass.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that in Corruption, but this is kind of just like kicking the song off with that sort of sound.
Forgive me, Father, but with all due respect, I do not seek your approval, nor do I fear your wrath. This world is a
And maybe for no other reason other than the fact that y'all will never be able to hear this outside of this podcast. This is the lead guitar that's happening over top. I think we had talked about this earlier, but those all were added pretty late in the record. And
Yeah.
that mostly speaks to our inexperience on the production side of the house, because we just weren't really sure what we were going to need sonically to fill, these different frequency bands. So we weren't really sure when mixing was going to make them obsolete, or when that type of energy and movement was going to be welcomed.
Every word is a weapon that's clenched and clubbed to the chest.
I remember in our original demo for this, tracking that scream. I don't really remember writing it. No, I just remember a buddy and his family were going to be out of town, so he gave me a key to track vocals and guitars just in his living room. So I remember being in his house alone, just screaming this like non-word utterance over and over until I liked the take. You also had a pretty cool fill leading out of that part. Let me just confirm. Yeah, that's cool. And then we're back into that stomp beat.
Yeah, the fill's really just kind of a transition to that beat. Some 16th notes on the toms riding down to that floor tom to start off the stomp beat.
Forgive me, Father.
This is what gives us the Envy on the Coast Sugar Skulls comparison the most.
Forgive me, Father, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you make this
I think this little run is definitely kind of a flagship of our record, but I also think in like progressive rock in general, which is just to take a ton of your instruments from doing whatever they're doing to kind of merge together and perform some parallel run together.
Mm-hmm.
but you make this world so you could watch us burn into ash. And by thy will, my will, I confess. One man's rise from another man's death. One man's rise from another man's death. I'm the front.
I remember tracking this scream-y thingy.
One man's rise from another man's death.
And really thinking about, what was that Blink-182 song where Tom does one of the choruses, like they literally tracked him like 20 feet away from the microphone.
Is it I'm Feeling This?
Yeah. That was kind of the aesthetic we were looking for there.
Yeah.
The little lo-fi, far away from the microphone. Then bring it in for the real thing. I don't think I have much to say musically. I just am pretty proud of that chorus.
Yeah, it has some parts that almost kind of feel like odd time signatures, but it's not.
Yeah, this little like full band hit song, like we all go together on that crash cymbal with you a few times. Right here. Kind of makes it sound like a +3 situation.
Yeah.
Bringing back the honky tonk with that solo.
So instead of jumping right back into the verse there's the little like spooky vocal part. Do you remember where the like inspiration came for throwing that in?
I don't remember. I think it's there just to be spooky and kind of give the listener a break from all the whatever the opposite of negative space is, all the positive space that we've been filling up for the last 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, like every so often we just want to remind the listener that it's kind of like a theatrical cinematic experience. I remember showing this to a friend. And, first listen through the song, there's no expectations. And he's hearing that echo on the death, 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 death. And he just kind of makes this gesture, knowing that we're bringing in the noise after that, which is kind of, I know you and I talk a lot about, we don't want listeners to know what's about to happen necessarily, or we don't want them to guess our song structure or to guess our song lyrics before they happen. But when you're talking about a chorus and you're talking about building up kind of a tension and waiting for a release, that's a great sign when somebody on the first listen knows that a chorus is about to land.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm the fatigue, I'm the weakness in their knees, I'm the inner begging plea to buckle underneath the weight.
Let's just check out the vocal stack for that chorus just in case there's anything interesting.
I'm the fatigue, I'm the weakness in their knees, I'm the inner begging plea to buckle.
So we talked about this a little bit on Lost Cause, which is sometimes deferring to your harmony to help pack in a little bit of emotion into your line.
Fatigue, I'm the weakness in their knees, I'm the inner begging plea to buckle underneath the weight. Just wait, I'll see it
So this was a rare exception for a lead guitar part that was written a long time ago. It takes on the role of being a little bit of a melody because the vocal is just holding a long note.
Yeah. Kind of has that like Disney movie building and repeating feel to it too.
I think when we first released the record and a lot of like feedback and reviews were coming in and people were kind of placing us into that like prog metal vertical. At first I was a little taken aback by that. Like I wouldn't self-categorize that way, but then you listen to some of these like guitar parts that we wrote and just like kind of riding that third, I'm assuming that interval is like a very prog metal thing to do.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because neither of us really listened to that much of it.
But it's it's a fair association.
Yeah, I get it.
Little trumpet counterpoint here.
It's the allure of allure, it's the taste of the bait, it's the view from the top, not the thrill of the chase. I will make all of those who kneel.
So the job of this bridge is to just kind of slowly build and layer on some tension and hopefully boil over and overflow and release to that, you know, the apex of this plan. They won't know where to run if they don't know who they're running from. So it starts with just this piano and the drums.
The top, not the thrill of the chase. I will make all.
And it spills in our evil version of our main theme reprise.
Stand and rip it out from underneath, and you'll fall with no support, 'cause your support now works for me, and I'm too broken
And hopefully at this point things are boiling. We come back to our stomp beat.
where to run if you don't know.
And the whole pitch of the song is based on that vocal line being more or less at the very, very top of my range. Try to make that be as compelling as we can get.
Won't know where to run if you don't know who you're running from.
Is that really up there? No! Maybe that's not a true statement. I thought it was.
Pretty high up there for not falsetto. It's interesting how this part of the song was one of the last parts of the song that we kind of finalized, like going into the solo and then the solo. And I think it ended up being one of the coolest parts of the song, how it all just comes together right into the solo.
So hopefully you've all seen this video of Tom just murdering this solo. You and I had this solo break written into the song since 2008.
Yep, it's pretty similar to what you hear here, except without the without the guitar solo.
Right. We had an idea of the type of solo we wanted here, but we were pretty confident that I wasn't going to be able to mechanically play it for us. And sometimes with solos, I'm able to, or one of us are able to write it on some different instrument or with MIDI, but even here, we were just imagining, you know, like high energy, high swagger guitar playing. Mm-hmm. When I moved back to Boston, I met Tom through a mutual friend of ours, and the dude just rips on the guitar. So we reached out to him to see if he'd be interested in tracking a solo for this. The big thing that he brought to it that I had never considered was being able to have the guitar pick up before the vocal was done.
I love that part of it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And that was something that I was always struggling with when I was trying to write it myself. You have this sick fill going into that guitar solo. Oh my goodness. That is so fun.
It's pretty cool how it's pretty cool how the end of the vocal line is just finishing up as that fill's happening, as Tom's guitar solo is starting, like all at the same time, and they all just kind of fit together so well.
Carries us right back into our third chorus. We hop into our outro. I was noticing listening to this, and I hope you can just see from the drums, is how much of a relief rhythmically the outro is. From kind of at this moment, you have every eighth note covered with a kick or a snare drum.
Mm-hmm.
And so which note gets put out of place? So these are eighth notes here. Mm-hmm. So we skip an eighth note, skip another eighth note, so and then this is your swung beat, right? So this would be the eighth, so that's on the kick too.
Yep.
So a little more negative space rhythmically, and there's just that really sweet pickup, and we're accentuating the negative space with this cool kind of like big band, brass, guitar hits here. I think I took vocals for this part on 3 separate occasions, because I was really, really hoping, you can see how many of these are just muted out completely. I was really, really hoping that, there's singing, right, which is hitting the notes, and then there's kind of all the metadata that comes along with it. And so this one involves like a lot of kind of getting the chest and the rasp to come through to try to help bring forward that emotion.
I've been dealing with this shit for way too long. I've been waiting for my chance to turn the tables on this world. And I've been hearing screaming voices in my head singing.
Yeah, and trying to get the vocal to break there. Just little things like that to help solidify the emotion that we're going for. And I remember tracking this in Dimension Sound Studios in Jamaica Plain. Dan Cardinal, the guy who runs that studio, was kind enough to let me just rent out his vocal booth while he was doing other stuff. And I remember I'm in there with my laptop and my headphones, and I'm like blasting this part, and I'm like jumping around, like trying to get myself psyched up for this. And at some point afterwards, he said he glanced up a couple times because he thought there was like a bar fight happening outside on the streets. But it was just me probably trying to get this raspy part.
Singing, let it burn, let it burn, let it burn, let it burn.
And I guess this song, since it was written first, was the birth of the angry mob.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool. We're at the end of the song. I like this song a lot. I think sometimes it feels like it's the most honest composition, or like just the most technically well executed composition from like a songwriting standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's pretty solidly in our wheelhouse.
I also kind of feel like it would do pretty well in whatever like stage rendition of hypothetical stage rendition of Rope and Ladder.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what song comes next, Mr. Dolen?
Next we have The Invasion. Brings us into the main action of the whole record that we've been building up to.
Yeah, man, so much plot happens in The Invasion.
The Invasion's like not like the season finale, but like usually in the middle of a season of shows.
Yeah, like four characters die.
Like the 5th or 6th episode of a 10-show series.
Cool. So we'll be back. We keep saying next week. We haven't been putting these out every week, but thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Peace. Oh, you don't like when I wave at the camera.
I don't like waving at the camera.
Okay.
You can wave.
See, you're making a personal stance.
Yeah.
It's your life, dude. You can wave at whatever you want.
Are we waving at each other? Are we waving at the audience?
We're waving. I'm not waving at you. Waving at the audience.